Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm here with Austin. We're going to do a solo episode talking about some of the stuff that's going on in Venezuela. And yeah, so it'll be a good one to do. Just uploaded an episode on our last one that we did with Austin and Josh about Charlie Kirk. It's a good one, so go check that out in the previous episode. And then if you like what we're doing, like and subscribe. Comment down below some of what you think is going on in Venezuela. If you got anything to share, as well as if you have any suggestions for additional videos. So with that being said, I'm gonna kind of hand it over to you, Austin. Venezuela, what's going on down there? I know we've got some Trump shooting and killing some narco terrorist boats down in right off of Venezuela. But let's start from the very beginning. And honestly, I'd say maybe do you think maybe we should start from like pre-Trump, or do you think like starting at when Marco Rubio came in would be like a good place to start this narrative?
I mean, I guess a little background wouldn't hurt,
Okay.
but so Venezuela is like this leftist regime down in South America, and the U.S. has had a problem with it for a long time. Like, if I remember correctly, weren't they considered part of like the original Axis of Evil back in the 2000s or something?
Yep.
So I mean, it's been a while. During Trump's first term, they did try to do like I don't really know if you could classify it as a coup, but it was kind of like they tried to install like an opposition candidate. They did. There was some stuff went on with like some military defections and stuff, but it really kind of fizzled out more or less without any resolution to it. And so now that they're come back in office, it really does seem like they're really hardcore focusing on Venezuela. And
Now, it wasn't just the US that was propping up that opposition candidate, right? It was wasn't like pretty much all of South America kind of like backing them? Or I
at the
think it was like
time,
her, right?
yeah, it was a guy. I think
Oh,
his name was
okay.
like Juan Guaido or something like that.
Yeah.
Guido, something like that. Can't remember how exactly you pronounce that, but I think Colombia back then probably was, and they've had like a change of government since then, so they're kind of like more favorable to Venezuela now. So I mean, like last few years, there's been like a leftist wave in Latin America. Like you've seen Brazil elect Lula, you've seen Colombia elect Petro. Uh, there's been some really like leftist regimes get elected in like Central America. Like I think Nicaragua's back under kind of like a not exactly a Sandinista, but it's kind of like a Sandinista like derived kind of like descended, I guess you would call it.
Hmm.
And if anybody remembers the '80s with like the Contras and stuff, that's kind of the deal going on there. So yeah, I mean, like things have definitely changed in Latin America the last few years, but you know, that's kind of regime change down in Latin America has been Marco Rubio's big thing for a long time. I mean, he's a Florida Cuban, so I mean, it makes sense.
Hmm.
But yeah, so it seems like since the beginning of the year, they've really been increasing like the screws on Venezuela, and so like you said, there's been at least three publicly confirmed attacks on boats they claim were narco traffickers. I think there was some indications the other day they may have hit like one or two more off the record. They've just not released videos yet, but time
Hmm.
will tell on that. So I mean, there's definitely like kinetic action starting, and there's like I wouldn't say it's a massive, but it's a fairly decent U.S. buildup in the Caribbean right now. Like they've moved F-35s, they've got MQ-9 Reapers, they've got I think it's last I counted, they've got like three destroyers, a cruiser, and a nuclear attack submarine with like I think it's 150 Tomahawks is their capacity. So I mean, there's a fairly decent amount of firepower down there, and so kind of the theory that's going on right now is they might try to do some sort of air campaign. Like if anybody remembers Libya in 2011, that would probably be the model. It seems like at this point, and there's definitely been some attempted deal making behind the scenes. There was, I think, about a week or two ago, there was reports that like at least some generals that went by like had some off the record talks with Washington about maybe doing a coup, and then today there was like a defection of one general from their air force.
Yep.
I mean, there's definitely some stuff on that front going on, although it doesn't seem successful so far. But everything seems to be pointing to some sort of showdown. Like me and Andrew have been tracking it like the last week, like the last few days, the Venezuelans started like dispersing stuff to like fortified bunkers throughout the country, which seems to be kind of like in preparation for an air campaign like we just mentioned. So there's definitely signs that something is coming. I mean, at this point, I mean it could fizzle out, but it just seems like everybody's just taking the steps that would be necessary for something to kick off.
Now he's not Maduro, right?
Yeah,
He's not like a how do you want to call it he's I don't say he hasn't done any wrong, but he's not a saint, right?
yeah. He's not.
And because I remember there was a big thing during Biden where he was threatening to, was it annex some of Guyana, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and so it was one of those where it's like, he's obviously not great towards his own people. He was getting a little expansionist over trying to get into Guyana. And then, Trump's now saying he's got these narco terrorist groups. So, and, I know the last one may be disputed, but the stuff with Guyana and whatnot was pretty overt, right?
yeah. It was very much. So that extends back like over a century at this point. So like I think it was way back in like the 1890s. They had laid claim to that region because it's the way it works out in that region. There's like some river that runs through most of
Yep.
Guyana, and like they claim it's like it's if I'm pronouncing this correctly, if I'm not, forgive me, Esquibo or Esquibo, I think is how you pronounce it. But so yeah, it's this disputed region, and like the U.S. actually used to back Venezuela in that dispute. Originally, we backed them against the British because the British used to own Guyana, and then
Hmm.
we ever since Venezuela kind of moved to like an anti-American position, I guess you would say that we flipped on that.
Yeah.
And basically, the reason it became like such a big thing under Biden, Guyana found a bunch of oil reserves like directly off their coast, and so if they annexed that part of Guyana, they would have control over those oil resources.
Yeah.
So there's kind of like an energy element to it. There's also just kind of like Venezuela economically is not doing good, so yeah, pretty classic play is to try to like direct attention like outwards. So I mean, yeah, I mean Maduro's not a good guy at all. I mean, like I'm not gonna like I'm personally anti-interventionist, but I'm not gonna like pretend like he's like right and anything. It's
Yeah.
it's definitely like I think I saw somewhere like 10% of their population or more is like fled in like the last 2 years or something. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
definitely obvious that country's pretty rickety.
I remember my Spanish teacher in high school, like freshman year, so this must have been like 2012. She was Venezuelan and she was like, yeah, like we were like trying to get out of that place. It was not good to be at and everything like that. And that was, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
That might have been right when Maduro kind of came in and took over, I think.
yeah, that's about when Hugo Chavez died.
Yeah.
So
And
apparently, go ahead, sir.
I was just gonna say into like the question that I kind of posed to you and is one that we were kind of talking about in the group chat is, so if we did bomb them, if we did, and we probably wouldn't invade them, right? Like we wouldn't go that far. We'd want to probably do I think maybe it's the correct word, like a plebiscite, where like they kind of the people rise up or something like that against their
Yeah, like some
government.
sort of,
So,
or
I think the idea was is that we would do something like that against them, right?
yeah.
And maybe their people would rise up and take over and everything like that. So that's why I'm kind of like, so like what, like it almost kind of seems like, so like what's the question that I have to you is, why would it be a bad thing? Obviously, we fuck a lot of stuff up, but it's like, why would it be a bad thing to potentially take action against them?
So again, not trying to defend Maduro, like I don't want to give that impression, but there is like for me, in the sense that like me and you are both old enough to remember Libya. We're
Hmm.
we're too young to remember Serbia, but like and then we kind of remember Iraq because we're kind of in that weird age group where we kind of remember stuff. So basically, the exact same playbook we used in Libya was we did this air campaign. We kind of and then the Libyans rose up and overthrew Gaddafi and killed him. Almost immediately, that country imploded, and then you literally had like the year after he got killed, you had the attack on the U.S. embassy in Benghazi. You
Hmm.
had ISIS take over pretty large chunks of Libya.
Yeah,
So
it's
there
in like
had to
a
be like,
civil war now too, isn't
yeah,
it?
it's still in it's it's been almost 15 years and it's still in a civil war. So there's that. And then two, where Libya collapsed, it became this huge like exit point of like refugees to Europe. So it wasn't just Libyans fleeing after Libya collapsed. Like a lot of like people from the Sahel, from the rest of Africa, used Libya as like an outlet. Like it became this huge like refugee endpoint into Europe. Like a huge, they've got huge over there with like boats and stuff. And like like I already said, like I can't remember the exact percentages. I want to say it was like 10% have fled in like the last couple of years. But if like Venezuela collapsed, like a lot of those Venezuelans probably would come here, and then like I just don't think a refugee crisis would be in anybody's interest in America right now.
Yeah.
And then two, it wouldn't just like I said, like we saw in Libya, it wasn't just like Libyans. If Venezuela collapsed, it wouldn't just be Venezuelans. There'd probably be a fair amount of Brazilians. There'd probably even be some Ghanaians. You'd see a lot of people.
Yeah.
So between like a refugee crisis, the chance that like this could turn into like a never-ending civil war with all that entails. And like we do know, like I've sent it to you, and we've talked. I think we've been talking about it for a while because like this is one thing me and you have definitely been tracking for a while. It's like the influx of like Russian and Chinese gear into the region, especially as they
Hmm.
try to prop them up. Like I don't think Venezuela, like if the U.S. goes in, I don't think the Venezuelans could win, but I do think they could make it costly enough to make it painful. And then two, if it collapses into this like never-ending civil war, they're close enough to the Panama Canal. They could do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Like just harassing, like the Houthis do. They could just constantly harass shipping in the area. So I just don't think strategically it makes sense. Like if we want to do a pressure campaign to hopefully get the people to like, or like a military coup or something like that, that to me would make sense as a play. But like a full-on kinetic military thing, it just to me that just seems like it'd just be too costly.
Yeah.
Not even if not directly, like indirectly, like I just said.
Well, and that's why I was, I kind of thought of it. I was like, the U.S. can probably send the missile to do it, to make you just bomb Maduro and take him out
Yeah,
or whatever it is. Like we could do that, but then it's like that's why I was kind of bringing up Guyana a little bit because if I remember right, like it was like Colombia and Brazil and
yeah,
maybe it was Argentina were like, hey, like they were pushing back on Venezuela, and I was kind of like, hey, like if you're going to do anything in that area, you've got to have them basically be
yeah,
okay, we're going to step up and we're going to take over and do
yeah,
blah blah blah. And I see and I'm curious how much this is with how much you think about this is what Venezuela's got what the third or fourth largest oil reserves or something like that in
yeah.
the world. And so I almost wonder how much of that is also a factor. Because I know like what is it, Chevron or whoever is already down
Yeah.
there, but it's very limited. And I almost wonder, okay, so like doing this how much of it is essentially stabilizing oil prices or having backup oil, that kind of stuff? Like how much of that is involved, maybe resources is involved in this potential decision?
That's something I thought about and I have been tracking it with people. So like our consideration at this point. So like the thing that like I knew and like other people have pointed out to me in more detail. So Venezuela's oil is mostly, and I know it sounded like, oh, I'm a southerner, get over it.
It's
Venezuela's,
different,
yeah,
right? It's like
yeah,
thick.
it's like heavy. It's what they
Yeah.
call like heavy crude. And see, American oil is like light sweet.
Yep.
So basically, our refineries can't refine Venezuelan oil. They used to be able to, but then we changed them with like the shale energy revolution.
Hmm.
But the thing with that is Russian oil is of, if I remember correctly, is of a similar consistency. So, like a theory I've seen, and it kind of does make a certain amount of sense, where all of a sudden they're starting to try to push really hard for like Russia sanctions. If they could get Venezuelan oil on the market to replace Russian oil,
Mm.
so that's been something suggested. And I kind of think about it, like they've been doing stuff since they got in at the beginning of this year, but it does seem like here lately it's ramped up a lot. And that kind of matches when they started pushing for like increased sanctions. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is something like somebody at the Pentagon's like, okay, if we can actually, flip them, then we could probably replace Russian oil at least for like Europe and stuff.
Hmm.
So I mean, that would not surprise me. And then, like I said a second ago, like Russia and China are backing Venezuela. That is kind of like their ally in the region. And if they can get rid of Venezuela, they could probably collapse Cuba at this point. Cuba, if Venezuela's had like 10% of their population like run away, I think Cuba's had like 20%. Like
Yeah, it's
Cuba's had
been
like
it's been
seven.
bad since the 50s.
Yeah, it's gotten really bad here in the last few years. They think like a large chunk of the population fled in the last couple of years. So I mean, it's kind of like the same deal as Venezuela, but possibly worse. And so if you can get Venezuela to collapse, you can get Cuba to collapse. Like I said earlier, like Nicaragua, you could probably get Nicaragua knocked out at that point, and then that kind of starts really tilting the balance in the region. So they could be kind of looking at this like a domino too. So I mean, get the oil, replace Russian oil, and then strategically rebalance the region. Like there's definitely been a lot of signs the U.S. kind of wants to start focusing more on like Latin America. So I mean, that could be kind of part of that play as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I was sitting there thinking like, okay, how much of this is with the oil down there? Because I mean, that's always been the whatever you want to call it, the act,
Charge.
right? You know, it's like, hey, like, you know, anything that you do with Venezuela, I think they're even in OPEC, but it's like they're not, you know, they're not really producing a lot,
Yeah.
utilizing a lot of the reserves. So it's like, okay, you're not disrupting the economy, but if you can control it, then you kind of control a lot of the broader economy. And then if you can coordinate with, you know, US produces a lot, Canada produces a lot, you know, some of our Middle Eastern allies and so on and so forth, to where you kind of can shore up your supplies in case something happens. And so that's why I was like, well, you know, I wonder how much of that is in there just because, you know, I don't think there's really any other resources of note in Venezuela of other than the oil. That's always the one that people talk about. And so I'm like, you know, it's kind of like, you know, they kind of go together on any sort of action that you'd have in that country.
Yeah. Can't think of any other resources they have either. A lot of their interior is like basically inaccessible jungle, so there's kind of that
Hmm.
element. So, but yeah, there's definitely that, and then it seems to be kind of like there's. I mean, like the strategic goals kind of seem obvious. I think once you kind of like look at it. So I mean, so yeah, I kind of think in that regard, yeah.
Yeah. How much of so if we ended up doing some sort of action in Venezuela, do you think it would look a lot like Colombia where the government is pro-US, but there's like the FARCs, you've got a lot of these paramilitary groups that are kind of like in the rural regions kind of doing their thing? How much of that do you think would be the end state?
But kind of like an insurgency after the fact.
Yeah. That's what I'm like, well, you know, with the FARC, I think it's like, I don't know if it's exactly like an insurgency, but it's like a paramilitary opposition. But
Yeah,
I think that Colombia's kind of had some more resolution on that. And that's why I'm like, I wonder how much of the Venezuelan kind of situation would turn into something like that.
yeah. So Colombia never had like a period where its government was like super leftist and kind of against the
Yeah.
U.S. But like we, I mean, like obviously in the Middle East, like this happened every single time we went in. But now Latin America is kind of like a different thing. So I, it really depends. If there's enough civilian buy-in, you could probably limit that, but it also really depends on like how much collateral damage we do, and then it really depends. So a lot of people have fled Venezuela, so that kind of does also make me stop and think like, okay, who's like you could be getting a selection thing at this point where it's like if you're really opposed to the regime, you've already left at this point. So
Hmm.
does that mean most of the people that are still there are kind of in favor of the regime?
Yeah, see, that's a good point that you bring up because that's exactly what I was thinking, where when a regime like that's been in power for so long, and they're like, "Oh, well, we'll just take out the regime." It's like, okay, but like, who's still there for you to do anything with? You know, like all the probably the prominent Venezuelans over in the U.S., just as in Cuba, they're all over in Florida.
Yeah, and a lot since we they tried back in like 2019, there's definitely been some purges. So it is
Hmm.
kind of like I said, like their military is probably pretty brittle, is my feeling of it. But like they do have like dedicated like it's th- there's kind of like the regular Venezuelan army, and then they've kind of got like their. I guess you could almost compare it to like the Iraqi Republican Guard if you remember them from like Saddam's regime. So it's like you got the military that kind of sucks, but you got the guard that's kind of like ideologically committed and stuff. So like you can kind of count on them to actually fight. So I don't know. Like I said, I feel like if we actually went in, we could probably do it. It's just the question of what comes after, and that to me is just so hard to predict because there's so many. You know, like we just said, like there's that element of like, okay, who's left? There's the element of like, historically we've seen once we bomb a country, they don't tend to like us that much. So there's
Yeah.
kind of that consideration. There's just so many factors. It's hard to say, and it's kind of that's one reason I bring that up because it's like Yemen is like another one of those countries that's been like a constant civil war ever since like their government collapsed, and now it's like you got the Houthis that shut down the Red Sea. Do you really want somebody like the Houthis in Venezuela shutting down the Panama Canal? I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, and that's why I almost wonder how much, and you're kind of saying like, oh, China and Russia are like aligned with them. It almost makes me kind of wonder like, okay, but like how aligned are they really? You know what I mean? Like, okay, like are you sending military weapons there? And it's like, okay, like we kind of do that to a bunch of other countries as well. And we
yeah,
don't consider them their allies. So it's like, okay, like would China really step in if Venezuela was attacked? I just think just geopolitically and geographically, I don't know what if they could. I mean, I mean, you'd probably get more resistance from the cartels than you probably would anyone else.
Yeah, I don't think like the Chinese would like directly intervene. I feel like them and the Russians would just kind of do the whole like, we'll send you weapons. You know, you got advisors there. There might be some covert actions. I mean,
But it's like how could you even get weapons in there? You know, I mean, like Puerto Rico's right there. You're basically blockading the country. Colombia's not going to let anything in from their side, and it's like okay, now you're looking at Guyana and I think maybe Brazil
yeah,
that's there, and it's like okay, like you know maybe through who's is it AMLO is the Brazilian leader?
no, you're Lula.
Lula. Okay, so I always get him and the other guy confused because they kind of go back and forth, where
Yeah.
like one's in charge and then he, you know, takes the leftist and puts him in jail, you know, and then it kind of goes flips, you know.
So there was reports about a month or so ago that the Russians, and I don't know how much stock I put in it because it was kind of weird, but like it kind of makes sense because they do have close ties. There was reports that the Russians and the Iranians had built like a drone factory in Venezuela, kind of like
Mm,
the one-way attack drones like they've been using. So there was reports of that, and then the Russians have been talking about stationing troops in Nicaragua, which is kind of close. And
hmm
obviously there's Cuba, so I mean there's those, and then Colombia and Brazil have both indicated they don't support like an action against Venezuela. The current president of Colombia, his name is Petro, and he's like pretty leftist, like, and like he's kind of signaled he would give some sort of support. So I don't think he'd like directly intervene, but I do think I wouldn't be surprised if like he lets like the Chinese or somebody like run guns through him. I feel like it would be stuff like when Afghanistan was going on towards the end. There's been rumors for a while that the Russians started supplying the Taliban with like weapons, like especially like air defense and stuff like that, like man pads, like those portable anti-air rockets and stuff. So I mean, like that is a play they've used before. So I wouldn't be surprised if through Brazil or Colombia or Nicaragua they run kind of not like planes, but kind of like like we'll send you anti-air rockets, we'll send you RPGs, we'll send you that sort of stuff. Kind of like low cost, but kind of like your typical insurgency stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised about stuff like that, honestly.
Do you think that there would be, or do you expect that there would be any special operations occurring in South America? Because we do have, was it, um,
Southcom.
is it Southcom?
Yeah.
Okay, so I knew we had like our own group in South America, and I know a lot of them are doing what is it like anti-terrorism and all that kind of stuff and cartel stuff down there. And so
Oh
I
yeah.
almost wonder how much of that's going to be starting to gear towards Venezuela.
I would imagine there's probably already guys on the ground. That tends to be pretty typical. They send in like Delta and stuff. Like here recently, like we had talked about it. Like it came out back in 2019. They'd even sent a Delta team, or was it no, it was SEALs into North Korea. So I would definitely not be surprised if there's already guys on the scene or they're already doing stuff in other countries.
Okay.
Um, they've got like 4,000 Marines down there between like the Navy, like the ships the Navy has, like Puerto Rico and stuff. So like one theory I have seen is like Venezuela has like offshore islands and offshore naval platforms, or not naval, but oil platforms.
hmm
So like a theory is they might use the Marines to like secure those islands and maybe take over those oil platforms and stuff just to kind of put additional pressure. Somebody I talked to thought they might, so like if they could get like a military coup, they could use the Marines to, like quickly secure points in like Venezuela itself. So like say there's a coup tomorrow, they could fly the Marines in and hopefully secure like an airport or something. Just to kind
hmm
of, so I mean that through there, but yeah, definitely. If nothing else, definitely special forces.
How do you think it's ironic that, you know, what was it, Guantanamo was originally a naval air station, or it's a naval station, right?
Yeah.
Do you think it's kind of ironic that now it may be repurposed to, you know, start prepping launches in Venezuela and Cuba?
No, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, it was a pretty big naval base back during the Cold War because like Cuba was aligned with the Soviets, so like
Mhm.
they've definitely had that place prepped for a while for something like this, and I can definitely see it. Now, the really funny thing is after the Cold War, we shut down a lot of our stuff in Puerto Rico. Like the Puerto Ricans just didn't really want a
Yep.
lot of military infrastructure there. So now they're using like air national guard bases down there, which is pretty
Yeah.
funny.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you because I saw they were like, I think that's where the F-35s are, right? They're
Yeah,
all based in Puerto Rico. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, do we have fucking bases in Puerto Rico? I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if we had one down there just as like a redundancy and probably to help us more with, that the branch
yeah.
of islands right there. And but I was like, do we even have anything down there?
We
I was
used
like, shit. I was like, I don't even know. You don't hear about it, you know?
they used to have Roosevelt roads, but they shut that down. I think in like the early 2000s.
Hmm.
So that's why they're using like the Air National Guard stuff because basically everything that was like dedicated back in the day has been shut down. So that is
Yeah.
kind of like, uh, and I think that's part of the reason. Like I sent that last night. We kind of joked about it, like watch it happen tonight. Uh, the Pentagon started telling like reporters they can't be reporting on like deployments and stuff now unless it's been like cleared.
Mm.
And supposedly part of the reason for that is where they're stuffing them in the Air National Guard. It's a lot of Air National Guard bases are also like shared civilian facilities. So
Yep.
it's kind of like a regular civilian airport, and then there's kind of like the military side of it. And like there's reports that like the Puerto Ricans are like, man, they're moving everything in here. It's just like getting really crowded in this airport.
Yeah. Well, that's how a lot of bases are, Knoxville. That's where the Air National Guard is. And then there's like I think it was maybe out in Memphis. I think they've got one there. And I flew in somewhere else where it's like that's common, but yeah, it's like you don't just see like a rush of material there and then you're like, "Oh, like my flight's been delayed. Why is that?" And then you see fucking F-35s landing, you know?
Yeah,
You don't see that shit happening in Knoxville, Tennessee, you know?
yeah. That's even like down here in North Carolina. Like there's like the Linville Gorge near where I live. So like
Mhm.
they're constantly flying planes through there and like testing missions. I've seen C-130s. I've seen it. I don't think I've seen an F-22 yet, but they've definitely flown like the Navy's flown like F-18s. The Air Force has flown F-15s. F-16s. The Air National Guard unit trains its stuff. I mean, it's pretty wild. Like, and then there's Hickory Airport nearby, and I think the Guard uses that sometimes. But yeah,
Hmm.
like what you like if you're like a regular operations like civilian airport, all of a sudden, like you said, like there's F-35s like taking
Yeah, I
the
know you're
half
like
around.
you're like hey guys, should we be aware of something? You know, it's like when you see like everybody like nothing's going on and then something happens and you immediately see like everybody pulling up their phones being like, "Hey guys, F-35s are landing in Hickory, North Carolina. What's going on with that?"
That's definitely like, and when Helene happened last year, which that's we're
Yep.
coming up on the year mark of that. Like, that was one of the craziest things. Is like you were having constant overflights of like I know I saw pretty sure I saw Air National Guard Hueys. I saw Blackhawks, I guess from like Bragg, and then we also started seeing at one point like I think it was like Sea Kings, which are like the big Navy and Marine Corps helicopters. That was like one of the most notable things about that. Like it kind of like freaked us out at first because it's like they're constant overflights like military choppers.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine they're kind of the same reaction down in Puerto Rico.
So, what's the timeline? Do we think something's gonna happen soon? Do we think there's gonna be an invasion? What do you think?
If it's going to happen, it's going to be a weekend. Like we've all kind of picked up on
Yeah.
that at this point. Like
Trump likes to do that.
yeah, like when they bombed Iran, it was on a Saturday night. Like the middle, it was literally like I think we had just did an episode when that happened, and then like 5 minutes later, it's just like, oh, he sent out like a what was it like a Truth Social post? It's like, yeah, we just bombed Iran. It's like, what man? Like,
Yeah, no, no, dude. I mean, I vividly remember that we were in our this place we were running in down in Colombia, and I sat there and I remember we got on the thing. And we said, "Well, if it doesn't happen here within the next few hours, it's probably not going to happen till next
next
weekend
weekend,
or something
yeah,
like that." And then like literally we closed the episode, and like you said, like an hour or two later, you get the notification, and I'm like, "Shit!" I'm like, "We missed it," like we could have done it before or after, all that kind of stuff, but.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
it's kind of. I kind of wonder if that'll end up happening with this. Like tonight, we'll get like a text, like a notification, like, "Oh yeah, they just bombed Caracas or something."
Well, and it's interesting because even with when Iran, shot their rockets at in Qatar, it was one of those things where it's like, you'll know before the US government tells you, right? Because you'll start seeing, hey, what the fuck's happening in Caracas, or what's happening
Yeah.
what are these boats coming in, getting close to the Brazilian or Venezuelan beaches. It's like, what's going on there, And then Trump will come out like an hour later and be like, yeah, we did this thing, And it's like, oh, okay. So that's why for me, that's why I'm glad I'm on Twitter because I'm like, that's where you're gonna see it. You're gonna see it there way before you see it anywhere else.
It never fails. I think I was like when we started doing this, that was one big thing I got kind of pushed you to do was like use your Twitter kind of like you can it never fails. You'll have somebody like, hey guys, there's planes flying over my city right now. Something might be going on, and then like 2 hours later you get like the news notification or whatever. Yeah. Speaking of like the Iran strike, what ended up happening with that? There was some guy like 2 days before posted like, "Hey, I just saw like a bunch of B 2 bombers going like east, and like we had been tracking it. They were like the ones that they were making a big show about were going west. It was kind of like the distraction mission. So we
Hmm.
were like, well, that's I remember like I feel like me and you had talked about it. I was like, I don't know, man. That just seems kind of weird. Like nobody else spotted that, and then lo and behold, like a day later, he was like confirmed, like he'd actually saw the planes going there, and then like the one that like everybody always talks about when they raided that compound for Bin Laden back in 2011, there was some guy in like that Pakistani city was like, "There's something going on in my city. I don't know what's happening." And then like
Yeah,
years later, it's like OBL is dead. So yeah, like without a doubt, probably what will end up happening is like somebody will like post like pictures of like explosions or something in their city, and that's how we'll know. I mean,
yeah.
it's always how it goes anymore.
So
But
I want to say one other thing with the whole using Twitter. I mean, with the Kirk stuff. I mean, like people were putting a ton of stuff out there, and what I really like about it was that there's a lot of reasonably intelligent people on Twitter. And so, yeah, there's like a lot of voices, but it's like there's enough people who are kind of like reasonable enough and like someone posts something like, yeah, that doesn't look right. Or like, oh yeah, but like that thing right there, that says something. And like there's enough of that to where it's kind of like, for example, like when we were talking about, what the Kirk's guy was using with like how he was hiding the rifle, right? Like there's tons of people who like immediately when that happened, they started being like, hey, like well, let's find out what's going on with that. Let's look at all this stuff, let's look at all the data and material. And then, you're kind of able to be like, okay, like people are thinking the same thing that I'm thinking and they're tracking it. And it's not just like mainstream news where they're like, hey, this happened and it's very high level. You can get some really medium and low level detail.
yeah,
So wrap it up for me, Austin. How much of this is a play against Russia and the shift in strategy? How much of this potential involvement is in Venezuela is to kind of corner Russia geopolitically?
I'd imagine it's definitely a factor. But like the biggest thing to me seems to be like we talked about when like he's Pat Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, like that kind of.
Yeah,
I remember you talking
clear
about.
signal.
Yeah, it was like that's definitely going to be doing Latin America stuff. So I think there's kind of that inbuilt default kind of nature of it inside the administration. I would imagine now that like the peace effort in Ukraine's looks like it's pretty much failed at this point. So there's probably kind of an effort to look at something low cost they could do to apply pressure. So I mean, there's that. So it's definitely a factor, but I also think it's just like we're kind of in that stage now, and like me and you, like even before he tapped Marco Rubio, that was something we had talked about because it was like they're probably going to start looking at like securing Latin America because not just the Russians but the Chinese have been making a lot of plays. So this is probably kind of part of that in a broader picture.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it's just a multitude of factors, and they all just kind of align at this point. So
Okay. Well, we'll end it there and like and subscribe and tell us what you think. Do you think this is part of a grand strategic play against Russia and China, or is this something different? So please like and subscribe, comment down below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
peace.